Good morning. My name is John Shaper. My wife Lynn and I are the national coordinators for Living Water Adopt a Child in Canada. And before I get into the meat of this video, I'd like to be able to say thank you for being awesome sponsors. Your support and sponsorship of this ministry, your faithful support, makes it possible for it to happen at all. So thank you. Thank you very, very much for doing that. In this newsletter, I would like to give the first in a series of video presentations that will deal with the mission and the ministry of Living Water Adopt a Child, in the way that it's run and in the way that it's fleshed out in real life. So, let's begin. I'd like to look at Romans chapter 1, verse 16. It says this, "I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile." And it's with this bold proclamation that Paul begins his brilliant description of the gospel. He starts by giving a vivid description of man's need for salvation, goes on to describe what God has done to provide for that salvation, then talks about God's fail-proof plan, how it works, how it's been established, goes on to talk about Israel's part in God's plan, and finally describes how the church is to live out their salvation on a day-to-day basis. Now, who is better qualified than the Apostle Paul to make that kind of statement? And with it, he also sets the tone for the life and attitude of committed believers everywhere, from the time he wrote that book right up until this very day. Now, some time ago, I was in a meeting of other leaders of Adopt a Child. I can't really remember the context. I'm not even sure exactly what we were talking about, but I do recall along the way that someone asked the question, "Why is it that you're part of this ministry?" And so I responded by saying that the reason why I support Adopt a Child is because it is unapologetically and unashamedly Christian. From first-hand experience, I've watched other Christian organizations and ministries start off well, with good motives, good intentions, but for some reason, over time, they lose their way. Maybe it's because they've compromised their message out of concern for being contemporary, or maybe they've compromised their message because they've applied for government grants and now the government is asking them to comply to regulations. But I remember when I went down to Guatemala for the first time, I saw hundreds of children line up for food and for medical and dental treatments. And then after they've eaten a very solid nutritional meal, they were invited to join a discipleship class to learn about Jesus. I don't know exactly the number, but I'd say 20%, maybe even 30% of those who came to that feeding center did. I recall standing with workers and standing with children and other leaders, and just simply taking the time to bow our heads and to pray God's blessing on them and on that meal and on that day. We visited churches, many of them planted by the ministry. I even had the chance to preach in some, with interpreter, I might ask, because I don't really speak the language all that well. No, not at all, actually. I remember going to the homes of sponsored children and sat with the children, sat with their parents and other members of the family, and we shared the gospel. And we prayed together. On one occasion, we went to an upper room area. And there were 25 to 30 what I call feeding center graduates in their late 20s and maybe early 30s. And they were being trained to become evangelists in their communities. No apology, no compromise. It's what the leadership of Adopt a Child believe, and this is what the leaders of Adopt a Child do, both in Guatemala and also Albania. Now, I haven't had the chance to visit Albania. I'm looking forward to my first visit there. But for the time being, I can only speak from what I see and what I hear. By the way, the leadership in both countries are amazing in their commitment, amazing in their faith, amazing in their work ethic. So refreshing to see. But I have to cut this video short because time doesn't permit me to go on to talk about all the stories that I could tell one after another of my experiences there and of the things that I've heard others say. You'll have to stay tuned to what they call the rest of the story. But for the time being, I just simply like to say thank you again for your faithful support. If it were not for you, there would not be any ministry. God bless you, and thank you.